Okay, so before we actually get into all of the speed solving, the blindfold solving, all that stuff, I do want to go over some of the history of the Rubik's Cube first off. So it was actually invented by a man whose last name was Rubik, which is part of the reason that it has that name, although it didn't always. His name was Erno Rubik. He's a Hungarian professor. He still actually is around. He works, occasionally he'll work at the Rubik studio, which makes Rubik's Cubes, and I believe he's retired, but I'm not 100% certain on that, officially from his teaching position. The invention of the cube is actually kind of a neat story. Originally, Professor Rubik, he was a professor of architecture and interior design at the time. He wanted to make this shape. So I like the nice ringtone. He wanted to make this shape where when you turn aside, everything is allowed to turn. Exactly what we're used to thinking of as a Rubik's Cube. But he had no intention to color the sides. He only wanted the shape to be free turning on all sides in all directions, as many times as you want it. So you'll notice on a cube, you can continually turn one side the same way, and it's never going to lock up or freeze or anything like that. His first design for a cube used elastic bands, because he wasn't quite sure how exactly was he going to make this shape. Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. That does it. So.
Yeah, just computer's on the edge here to be out of the way of the projector.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. So originally he wanted to be able to make this shape, but he had no intention to color the sides. He was not thinking of building a puzzle. He only wanted the design puzzle of how do you actually make it turn free, freely without locking up. He tried it with elastic bands and it didn't work because the problem with the elastic bands is if you continue to turn in the same direction, at some point the bands are going to intertwine or lock up or even break. So his next idea, he was actually kind of stuck. He wasn't quite sure, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? So what he got his inspirational moment sitting on the shore of the Danube, which runs right through Budapest. And he saw the water flowing over stones in the river. And over time, it had smoothed the stones out to a very smooth shape. And that was his aha moment. He realized that the shapes of the pieces need to be in such a way that they lock themselves into place and they hold themselves together. And I'm going to show you the insides of a cube a little bit later. So, first thing, a little bit about me. Again, I am a competitive Rubik's Cube solver. My name is Chris Harbeck, for anybody who is just coming in if you missed the very first part. I compete, and I have been competing for the last 8 years. And this is a picture of me doing the 5x5 cube blindfolded at the 2011 World Championship. This is something I will be talking a lot more in depth later about how the blindfold solving actually works. And this is something I've been doing for several years, and I actually won the tournament for the 5x5 blindfold event. So I am the 2011 World Champion for blindfold solving. So, thank you. But I will be discussing later what exactly goes into that. How does this work? Over the years, I've had actually 3 world champion titles, 8 U.S. national champion titles. I no longer hold any of these, but over the years, I've had 16 different official world records. They've all since been broken by other people. And they're not all 16 separate events. They were in 4 events, but occasionally I would break my own record, things like that. I still hold 2 North American records for the blindfolded events, so that is one thing I want to discuss today. The main focus of this talk, strangely enough, is actually going to be on memorization. So I'm going to talk about how do you memorize something like a full Rubik's Cube. And that is very applicable to all aspects of life. You can use it for remembering a phone number. You can use it for remembering a shopping list or a to-do list quite easily. But we'll find that you have to think in a different way than you're maybe used to. And we'll go over all of that later. Now this is Professor Rubik. This is a picture of him closer to today. I think this is when he turned 66. There was a large write-up in the paper. Things were going around about him. This is closer to the time when he originally invented the cube. Rubik is in his mid-70s now, I believe. He does occasionally still go to tournaments, so you can see him from time to time. But as a general rule, he doesn't travel that often, so you can only see him when a tournament happens in Hungary. Now, that is the prototype cube. That is the very first cube ever invented. It was the one Rubik himself made. You'll notice it's made out of wood. And again, it doesn't resemble the current cube shape or the colors because that's not what Rubik was looking for. He wasn't intending this to be a puzzle. The cube is able to turn on all 3 of the axes here and also this way. And you can see on this side as well. He did put colored dots on it at the start just to see, is it moving like I think it is? Are all the pieces actually able to move around? And the story of how it became a puzzle is he put stickers on every side. He scrambled it up, just not really scrambling it. He's just saying, does it turn like I expect it to? And he described it as seeing a beautiful parade of colors. So he knew his shape worked. He knew he was able to turn freely on all three axes in all directions. And then he said, okay, well, that was fun enough. Let's now bring it back to home. Let's just put all the colors back. And he was thinking, okay, sure, let's just do that. And then he sat there thinking, how do I do that? And that's when the puzzle aspect started. He started realizing this has potential. He was able to solve it. It took him a month to come up with his own first solution. And the solution he came up with is called a corners first solution. He actually started with the outer corners and then worked inward to the puzzle. That was actually the same solution used by the first world champion. Now, the first world champion obviously refined it quite a bit, but he used the same approach, basically. And this is a picture of the first world championship. This was in 1982 in Budapest, Hungary. And the winner was an American named Mensa. And there's a long-standing joke in the cubing community. Mensa's winning time was a new world record, you can see it in the back here, of 22.95 seconds. That record stood for over 21 years. So this is one of the really big, long-standing records in cubing. Part of the reason for that is, I'll go over a little bit later, but he at the time was a very fast solver. There were a couple of other people that were rumored to be a bit faster than him. And you'll see kind of what was going on. In the original tournament, they weren't allowed to prepare their cubes. They had to use new ones that were essentially brand new right out of the box, which if you've ever bought a new cube from the store, they don't turn very nicely. So Mensa was obviously a very, very skilled speed cuber, but his solution was much more able to handle a brand new cube because of the way it does turns, which is one of the reasons he was able to do quite very well. But there are other cubers at that tournament who were equally as fast as him who did not do nearly as well, because their solutions were not very well geared towards using a very brand new cube. Okay, currently the cube is kind of coming back, but it wasn't always this way. So there was the 1982 championship, which you figured, world championship, right? This is probably going to take off. This is a big fad in the 80s. It's everywhere. You can see cubes all the time. So this is probably going to be a big deal. Except for the fact that right after the World Championship, shortly after, the cubing went through a 17-year Dark Ages period. We jokingly refer to it as the cubing Dark Ages. Once the fad died, the cube pretty much kind of disappeared. You didn't see any competitions over that time at all. Occasionally you would have very small scale things, but nothing like a World Championship or a national tournament like you have today. So what brought it back originally, during the late 90s, the internet had a lot of people posting their solutions. A lot of the cubers from the original World Championship were posting their solution methods online. And a lot of us, I started in that time, and a whole bunch of other people who were current competitors started around then, because we were finding these solutions online, and they were coming from previous national champions, world champions, etc. So we all got really excited. Hey, this is really neat. This solution method obviously works. And that kind of started bringing things back together. The first online thing that brought the community together, forming the current speed cubing culture, which I'll talk a bit about, was a game called Rubik's Games. It came out in 1999. It was one of those ones sold on kind of like the cheap games rack. It wasn't even one of the main feature things. And it had a bunch of different Rubik's style puzzles, but it included an online portion, which got a bunch of us together. Now, more recently, you're finding that the cube is coming up in movies. So The Pursuit of Happiness was one that came up recently where you did see the Rubik's Cube featured fairly prominently. Will Smith is playing Chris Gardner, and he's using the Rubik's Cube to impress a potential future boss. He's trying to get an interview for this company to work at, a financial company. And the boss is just very busy, doesn't really have time to see him. But he ends up being able to finagle sharing a cab ride with this guy. And the boss is fiddling with the Rubik's Cube. And Chris Gardner, played by Will Smith, says, oh, I can solve that. So this is kind of based on a true story, but essentially it's featured in the movie somewhat prominently because it helps him get his job interview. Now, Will Smith, interestingly enough, was asked to do this scene, to do a Rubik's Cube scene, and the director pretty much said, we just want you to fake it. We're going to scramble a cube from solved, scramble it a couple of turns, and you just undo those turns. And I thought this was really neat. Will Smith said he would not do that. He absolutely would refuse to do that. He didn't want it to look fake. He actually hired a professional speed cuber, a competitive cuber named Toby Mao, to train him how to actually solve correctly. So if you're watching the movie, the method Will Smith is using in that scene is an actual solving method. You can recognize all the steps he's doing, so it's very authentic. which is something I thought was interesting.